Hello everyone, and welcome back to Easy English Podcast Story. Today, I want to share one of the most unforgettable experiences of my life, my first job. Every successful person has a beginning, and this is the story of mine. At that time, I had just finished college. I was full of dreams and hope, but I was also worried about my future. I wanted to become independent, earn my own money, and support my family. However, there was one big problem. I had no work experience, and I knew finding a job would not be easy. Every morning, I woke up with the same goal in my mind. I wanted to find my first opportunity. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and searched through different job websites. I carefully read every job advertisement, hoping to find one that matched my skills. Unfortunately, most companies wanted experienced employees. Every time I read the words experience required, I felt disappointed. I kept asking myself, how can I get experience if nobody gives me my first chance? It was a frustrating question, but I refused to let it stop me. Instead of giving up, I decided to prepare myself even more. I updated my resume and made it look as professional as possible. Although I had no work experience, I included my education, computer skills, language abilities, and volunteer activities. I printed several copies of my resume and placed them carefully inside a folder. I told myself that every interview, even if it ended in rejection, would teach me something valuable. Over the next few days, I visited many offices across the city. Some buildings were large and modern, while others were small and simple. At every office, I smiled politely and handed over my resume. Most receptionists accepted it kindly and said, "We will contact you if there is a suitable position." Those words gave me a little hope every time, but as the days passed, my phone remained silent. No calls, no emails, no interview invitations. After receiving several rejections, I started feeling discouraged. One afternoon, I returned home feeling completely exhausted. I placed my folder on the table and sat quietly in my room. I wondered if I was good enough. Maybe other people were smarter than me. Maybe they had better qualifications. For the first time, I began to doubt myself. It was a difficult moment because sometimes the biggest challenge is not the outside world. It is the negative voice inside your own mind. That evening, my mother noticed that something was wrong. She came into my room and asked why I looked so sad. At first, I tried to hide my feelings, but eventually I told her everything. I explained how many companies had rejected me and how hopeless I was beginning to feel. She listened carefully without interrupting me. Then she smiled gently and said, "Every successful person has a first opportunity. Before they became successful, they also faced rejection. Don't let a few failures decide your future." Her words gave me strength. She reminded me that success belongs to people who continue moving forward, even when life becomes difficult. The next day, I decided to improve myself instead of feeling sorry for myself. I started watching free online courses about communication skills, workplace etiquette, and Microsoft Office. I practiced typing every evening and learned how to write professional emails. I also spent time improving my English because I knew good communication would help me during interviews. Every small improvement made me feel a little more confident, and slowly I began believing in myself again. Weeks passed, and although I still had no job, I was becoming a better version of myself. Then, one Monday morning, something unexpected happened. While I was eating breakfast, my phone suddenly started ringing. I looked at the screen and saw an unknown number. My heart began beating faster. I answered the call with a nervous voice. A polite woman introduced herself and said she was calling from Green Tech Solutions. She told me that they had reviewed my resume and wanted to invite me for an interview the following morning. For a few seconds, I could not believe what I had just heard. After so many days of waiting, someone had finally given me a chance. I thanked her politely and confirmed the interview time. As soon as the call ended, I smiled from ear to ear. I shared the good news with my mother, and she looked happier than I had ever seen her. However, as the excitement slowly disappeared, another feeling replaced it: fear. What if I failed the interview? What if I forgot my answers? What if they realized I had no experience and rejected me again? That evening, I prepared everything carefully. I ironed my white shirt, polished my black shoes, arranged my documents neatly, and practiced introducing myself in front of the mirror. I repeated my answers again and again until I felt more confident. Before going to bed, I looked out of my window at the quiet night sky. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "Defa, tomorrow could change my life forever." With that thought in my mind, I closed my eyes, hoping that the next morning would become the beginning of a brand new journey. Alt text. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm clock rang. I looked at the time and realized it was only 6 o'clock, but I could not sleep anymore. Today was the day I had been waiting for. I took a shower, wore my white shirt and black pants, and carefully checked my documents one last time. Before leaving the house, my mother smiled at me and said, "Just be yourself. Don't try to be perfect. Be honest, be confident, and do your best." Her words made me feel calmer, and I left home with hope in my heart. The journey to the company felt longer than usual. While sitting on the bus, I kept thinking about the interview. I imagined different questions the interviewer might ask. Sometimes I felt confident, but a few moments later, I became nervous again. When I finally arrived, I stood in front of the office building for a few seconds. It was a beautiful glass building with people walking in and out confidently. I took a deep breath, smiled at myself, and walked inside. The receptionist welcomed me politely and asked for my name. After checking the interview schedule, she invited me to sit in the waiting area. There were several other candidates waiting for their interviews. Some were reading their resumes, while others were quietly looking at their phones. Everyone looked confident, and for a moment, I wondered if I was the least experienced person in the room. Instead of comparing myself with others, I closed my eyes for a few seconds and reminded myself that I had prepared well. I did not need to be better than everyone else. I only needed to give my best. After about 15 minutes, a friendly-looking manager came to the waiting area and called my name. I stood up, smiled, and followed him into a meeting room. The room was simple but professional. There was a large table, a laptop, and a few chairs. The manager introduced himself and asked me to relax because the interview was simply a conversation. His friendly attitude immediately reduced my nervousness. The interview began with simple questions. He asked me to introduce myself, and I spoke clearly about my education, my interests, and my goal of starting my professional career. Then he asked why I wanted to work for the company. I answered honestly that I wanted to learn, improve my skills, and become a valuable member of the team. I admitted that I did not have previous work experience, but I promised that I was willing to work hard, learn quickly, and always give my best effort. The manager smiled and asked a few more questions about teamwork, communication, and problem solving. Some questions were easy, while others required me to think carefully before answering. There were even a few questions that I could not answer perfectly. Instead of pretending to know everything, I honestly said, "I don't know the complete answer, but I am willing to learn." The manager nodded with appreciation. At that moment, I realized that honesty could be more valuable than pretending to be perfect. After nearly 30 minutes, the interview came to an end. The manager stood up, shook my hand, and thanked me for coming. He told me that the company would contact me within a few days. Although I did not know whether I would get the job or not, I walked out of the office feeling proud because I had given my best. For the first time in weeks, I felt confident instead of worried. 3 days later, while I was helping my father home, my phone suddenly rang. It was the company. My heart started beating faster as I answered the call. The woman on the phone smiled and said, "Congratulations. We are happy to offer you the position of office assistant. We would like you to join us next Monday." I could hardly believe my ears. After so many applications, interviews, and rejections, I had finally received my first job offer. I thanked her again and again before ending the call. My family was overjoyed when they heard the news. My mother hugged me with tears in her eyes, and my father smiled proudly. That evening, we celebrated with a simple homemade dinner. It was not an expensive celebration, but it was one of the happiest evenings of my life because I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The following Monday was my first day at work. I arrived almost 30 minutes early because I wanted to make a good first impression. The receptionist welcomed me warmly, and soon my supervisor introduced me to the rest of the team. Everyone greeted me with friendly smiles and handshakes. I immediately felt that the workplace had a positive environment where people respected one another. My supervisor showed me my desk, explained my daily responsibilities, and introduced me to the company's computer system. Everything looked new and unfamiliar. I listened carefully, took notes, and tried to remember every instruction. Although I felt nervous, I was also excited because I was finally working in a real office. This was no longer a dream, it was my reality. Later that morning, my supervisor gave me my very first task. I needed to organize several folders and update some information in the company's database. At first, the task seemed easy, but after opening the files, I realized there were hundreds of documents with different names and dates. I became confused and wasn't sure where to begin. Instead of guessing, I politely walked over to my supervisor and asked him to explain the process once more. He smiled and said, "Never be afraid to ask questions. We don't expect you to know everything on your first day. We only expect you to be willing to learn." Those words immediately removed my fear. I realized that asking for help was not a weakness. It was a sign that I cared about doing my work correctly. By the end of the day, I had learned many new things. I learned how to organize office documents, answer professional phone calls, communicate politely with colleagues, and manage my time more effectively. Although I was physically tired, I felt incredibly happy. As I left the office that evening, I looked back at the building and smiled. Only a few weeks earlier, I had been searching desperately for my first opportunity. Now, I was walking out of the office as an employee. I knew there would be many challenges ahead, but I also knew that this was the first step toward achieving my dreams. As the days passed, I slowly became more comfortable in my new workplace. Every morning, I arrived a little earlier than everyone else because I wanted enough time to prepare for the day. I organized my desk, checked my emails, and made a list of my daily tasks. The office no longer felt strange. It began to feel like a place where I belonged. I was still learning something new every day, but I was no longer afraid of making small mistakes. Instead, I saw every challenge as an opportunity to improve. One busy Tuesday morning, my supervisor gave me an important responsibility. A client was waiting for an updated report, and he trusted me to prepare the documents before the afternoon meeting. I was excited because it was the first time I had been given such an important task. I carefully collected the necessary files, organized the information, and prepared everything as instructed. I wanted to prove that I deserved this opportunity. After finishing the report, I attached the file to an email and sent it to the client. I felt proud because I believed I had completed the task successfully. However, only a few minutes later, my supervisor walked quickly toward my desk. His expression was serious, and my heart immediately began to beat faster. He asked me to come to his office. As I followed him, hundreds of negative thoughts filled my mind. I wondered if I had done something wrong. Inside the office, my supervisor opened the email I had sent. He pointed to the attachment and calmly explained that I had accidentally sent an older version of the report instead of the final one. The client had already received the incorrect document. My face became warm with embarrassment, and I felt terrible. It was my biggest mistake since joining the company. I apologized sincerely and admitted that I had forgotten to check the file name before sending the email. That conversation changed the way I worked forever. From that day on, I created a personal habit. Before sending any email, I checked the recipient's name, the subject line, the attached file, and the message itself. I never rushed important work again. Instead of seeing that mistake as a failure, I saw it as one of the most valuable lessons of my career. Sometimes the lessons we remember the longest are the ones we learn after making a mistake. As the weeks went by, my confidence continued to grow. My coworkers became more than just colleagues. We ate lunch together, shared funny stories, celebrated birthdays, and helped one another whenever someone needed support. I discovered that a good workplace is not only about completing tasks. It is also about building relationships, respecting others, and creating an environment where everyone can succeed together. One afternoon, my manager invited me into his office. This time, I was not as nervous as before, but I still wondered why he wanted to see me. He smiled and asked me to sit down. Then he said, "I have been watching your progress since your first day. You are hardworking, respectful, and eager to learn. Most importantly, you never repeat the same mistake twice. That is a quality every employer appreciates." Hearing those words filled me with pride. I realized that success is not about being perfect. It is about learning, improving, and becoming better every single day. Finally, the last working day of the month arrived. Everyone in the office seemed excited because it was payday. Around lunchtime, I received a notification on my phone saying that my salary had been deposited into my bank account. For a few moments, I simply stared at the screen. It was the first salary I had ever earned through my own hard work. It was not a gift from my parents or money borrowed from a friend. It was the result of my determination, patience, and effort. At that moment, I felt truly independent for the first time in my life. After finishing work, I decided not to go straight home. Instead, I visited a small shopping center. I wanted to buy something special for the person who had supported me from the very beginning, my mother. I walked through several stores before finding a beautiful blue scarf. Blue was her favorite color. I also bought a small box of her favorite sweets. They were simple gifts, but they came from my heart. When I arrived home, my mother welcomed me with her usual warm smile. I handed her the shopping bag and asked her to open it. She looked surprised because she was not expecting anything. When she saw the scarf and the sweets, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. I smiled and quietly said, "This is from my first salary. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." She hugged me tightly and whispered, "I am so proud of you." Those words meant more to me than any amount of money I could ever earn. That night, I spent a long time thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. I remembered the rejection emails, the unanswered phone calls, the moments when I wanted to give up, and the encouragement my family had given me. I realized that getting my first job was not the greatest achievement. The greatest achievement was becoming a stronger, more confident, and more responsible person through the journey. Looking back today, I understand that every beginning is difficult. Every successful person starts with uncertainty, fear, and many unanswered questions. Your first job may not be perfect. You may make mistakes, feel nervous, or face rejection. However, none of those experiences define your future. What truly defines you is your willingness to continue learning, improving, and moving forward no matter how many challenges you face. If you are still searching for your first job, don't lose hope. Keep developing your skills. Keep applying for opportunities. Keep believing in yourself even when nobody else does. One phone call, one interview, or one opportunity can completely change your life, just as it changed mine. Remember, every expert was once a beginner, and every successful journey starts with a single step. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it inspired you and helped you practice your English at the same time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Easy English Podcast Story, and join me again for another inspiring English story. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and never stop believing in your dreams.